The journey of Bleach continues with the third arc called the Arrancar arc, which is by far the longest arc in the series. It is personally either my favorite or my second favorite arc in the anime-only storyline, and it starts from chapter 184 going to chapter 423 in the manga. It is actually later adapted into episodes 110 through 316 of the anime, however keep in mind there's a few filler arcs thrown around in those episode numbers, so just keep that as a heads up. The arc's main themes embrace the ideas of identity once again, the heart, vengeance and revenge, and even loneliness. Many people confuse the arc with a saga, however it is a single arc. Now there are definitely points in which the arc you can split up and create into mini arcs, but the official title of this section of the story is the Arrancar arc, not the Arrancar saga. Anyway, without all further ado, let's begin the recap of the Arrancar arc. The story continues with Ichigo realizing that Uryu has lost his powers, being lost in thought he doesn't even notice the new student in his class who wrote his name backwards on the board, and sat right next to him. As the new student named Shinji tries to talk to Ichigo, Ichigo's substitute Shinigami badge goes off, forcing him to leave and go deal with a hollow. Later that night, the same thing happened. Ichigo gives Kon his body and rushes to go deal with the hollow. Meanwhile, he meets the new Shinigami assigned to Karakura Town, Zenosuke, or Afro Man. They talk to each other for a bit when Ichigo gets attacked behind by his classmate Shinji. Meanwhile, a hollow appears behind Uryu, and Kon leaves Ichigo's room, with a more humanized giant Grand Fisher secretly watching Kon from behind. Ichigo and Shinji continue to fight each other, and the Ryatsu waves are extremely powerful. Shinji then reveals himself to be part hollow, revealing that he is a Vizard, one of the masked army, and that he is here to be friends, as he wants Ichigo to join them. Meanwhile, Uryu is fighting with a hollow. Although he lost his Quincy powers, he was able to fill numerous gadgets with Ryatsu that are allowing him to buy his time throughout the fight. However, as everything seems against Uryu, his father Ryukin comes in and saves him from the hollow, killing it with absolute ease. After Ryukin destroys the hollow, he looks at Uryu and tells him that as the last of the Quincy, he can restore Uryu's powers under one condition. Uryu asks what the condition is, and Ryukin responds by saying you must swear to never involve yourself with the Soul Reapers again. Meanwhile, the giant human hollow thing named Grand Fisher is chasing Kon, when Kon is stuck in a corner. Suddenly, the talisman from his mother glows and it protects Kon from a strike, and a familiar voice speaks to Kon and Grand Fisher, for it to only reveal that Isshin Kurosaki walks in Shinigami robes. Back to Ichigo and his fight against Shinji, Ichigo refuses to join Shinji's group and refers to himself as a Soul Reaper, not one of Shinji's group. We then see Shinji joining a call and apologizing, but saying that it will only be a matter of time till Ichigo will join them, and to be patient. Meanwhile, Grand Fisher is almost gloating to Isshin with the pure size of his giant Zanpakuto. He refers to himself as an Arrancar, which Isshin explains to Kon is a hollow that takes their mask off to gain Shinigami powers. Grand Fisher continues to gloat, but within a single slash, he is defeated by Isshin. After dealing with Grand Fisher, Kisuke Urahara approaches Isshin and has a very casual conversation with him. They talk about the Vizards making contact with Ichigo and how they are a lawless gang of ex-Soul Reapers who acquired hollow powers through forbidden methods. They then speak about how Aizen has advanced the evolution of the Arrancars by using the Hokyoku, and how the Vizards are preparing for Aizen's army of Arrancars as they are heading to an all-out war that will involve everyone. In fact, even the Soul Society is in preparation. The next day at school, Shinji shows up to school normally, acting very weird around Ohime. This causes Ichigo to grab Shinji and talk to him outside. They talk for a while, however, one thing becomes clear. Ichigo's inner hollow is going to take control over Ichigo if he does not learn how to control it. He still refuses to join Shinji's group though. During Shinji's walk home after school, he runs into a fellow Vizard named Hiyori. Shout to Straw Hat Bud! Hiyori yells at Shinji and kicks him around a bit when Chad and Ohime confront the two about what they want with Ichigo. Meanwhile, Ryu agrees to take the training with his father. Hiyori is getting ready to kill Ohime and Chad, however before she can do it, Shinji grabs her and takes her away. Meanwhile, at Ichigo's house, Ichigo is suffering because what Shinji told him about his inner hollow. It is true. He feels as if he is going to be swallowed up. As he is struggling on his bed in this mental state, his sister tells him that she knows he's a Soul Reaper. Right as she says this, two Arrancars arrive in Karakura Town. Ichigo immediately denies that he is a Shinigami, however with the sudden arrival of two Arrancars that the Soul Society is watching in 4K, tons of people are being killed. So Ichigo tries to rush over there immediately, however before Ichigo arrives, one of the Arrancars named Yami is about to kill Tatsuki at the park until Chad and Ohime arrive. Chad immediately senses Yami's strength and tries to fight him alone, however is easily defeated. Ohime reacts to Chad's defeat by trying to protect Chad and eat him, and while this is going on, Ukiura begins to actually study her abilities as he finds them to be interesting and unique. Ohime tries to attack Yami, however Yami swipes Tsubaki like he is a gnat. Everything seems literally hopeless for Ohime, as she has no chance in this battle. This is when Ichigo Kurosaki finally arrives, prepared to fight. Ichigo immediately goes Bankai, and because of this, Ukiura and Yami both note that this is the kid they were searching for. However, before Yami can react, Ichigo cuts off his arm. However, one thing to note is before Ichigo can go in for a second attack, his inner hollow attempts to take control over his body. This immobilizes Ichigo as he has to fight the inner hollow within him while trying to fight Yami and Ukiura together. Because of this, Yami treats Ichigo like a punching bag until Kisuke and Yoichi arrive to save him. Kisuke and Yoichi both fight Yami and save Ohime, and they even begin to absolutely demolish Yami. As soon as the other Arrancar named Ukiura notices this though, he pushes Yami back, opens a portal, and leaves with Yami, saying their objective Ichigo Kurosaki is not even worth killing, escaping from further conflict. The following day, Ichigo is depressed as he is blaming himself for everything he was unable to do, that he was unable to protect Ohime, that he was unable to do absolutely anything when he was needed. And as time passes, he suddenly sees a few familiar faces at school. Ikaku, Toshiro, Rangiku, Renji, and Yumichika. And right after they arrive, Ruki appears climbing through the window. She immediately attacks Ichigo and drags his Shinigami spirit out to a hollow. Rukia then forces Ichigo to fight this hollow, and initially he was being absolutely destroyed by the hollow, as he was consumed by this fear of his inner hollow taking control, and the despairing feeling of failure. Rukia knew everything that Ichigo was feeling, and with one massive speech, she woke him up, almost allowing him to instantly defeat the hollow, and then right after he ends up apologizing to Ohime for being too weak. After this, Ruki and Ichigo go to his room, and they end up talking for quite some time. This is when the topic of Arrancars comes to light. Immediately, Ichigo's attic roof covering comes undone, and 4 of the 5 Shinigami poke their heads out. They explain that Arrancars are hollows that have removed their mask to obtain powers of hollows and Shinigami. Very few ever fully develop their powers, however with Aizen and the Hokyoku's help, suddenly tons of fully developed Arrancars have been born. We then learn from Toshiro, who gets inside from the open window, that the only effective Arrancar is removing the mask of a Menoso and above hollow. He teaches Ichigo about the 3 classes: the Gillians, which are the ones Ichigo had defeated early on in the series, the Asuchas, which are more intelligent and dangerous than Gillians, then there's the final class, which are Vastolordes. These Menos are stronger than captains. Meanwhile, in Hueco Mundo, Aizen welcomes Ukiura back and commands him to tell his 20 brothers what he has learned. Ukiura shows everyone his adventures by crushing his eye. Throughout the presentation, a certain other Arrancar made fun of Ukiura named Grimmjow, calling him soft for not killing them with the first strike. Ukiura, however, defends his actions, and Aizen gives Ukiura full responsibility over Ichigo. Back to the world of the living, every Shinigami on their mission has to find a house to live in. Rukia lives with Ichigo again, but the others have to go about in another way. As time passes on though, they each end up finding their search. Rangiku chooses to live with Aohime, Toshiro hangs out on Aohime's roof, Renji goes to Kisuke's shop, and Ikkaku and Yumichika are walking on the street. Plenty of time passes and Grimmjow and other Arrancars arrive in Karakura Town, prepared to kill every being with a speckle of Ryatsu. Each of the Arrancars pick their targets and begin combat. One of them attacks Chad and is about to one-hit kill him. This is when Ichigo shows up and grabs his hand. Ichigo tells Chad to step back and let him handle this. However, this mentally upsets Chad, causing him to feel sadness. Chad feels like Ichigo doesn't trust him anymore, and that they'll never fight as a team again. Rukia notices this and tells Ichigo to step back, as his level of tenseness could get him killed. She has Chappie hold on to him, while she pulls out her Zanpakuto to fight this Arrancar, whose name is D-Roy. She then releases her Zanpakuto entering Shikai by saying dance, so no Shai, Shirayuki. Her Zanpakuto turns white, and as a white ribbon appears on the end, she activates its first dance, which instantly freezes D-Roy, since he is within the circle's parameter. This actually kills D-Roy in the end. However, right after the death of D-Roy, the strongest Arrancar in this small group comes towards Ichigo and Rukia, and his name is none other than Grimmjow. Meanwhile, Keigo and Yumichika are watching Ikkaku fight another Arrancar. They are going back and forth, and Ikkaku is having a lot of fun throughout the fight. In fact, Ikkaku is not fighting to win, he is fighting for sport, and his opponent notices this really quickly. This causes his opponent to get quite upset and releases to try and show Ikkaku despair. Immediately everything turns around. Ikkaku is being hurt so badly that Yumichika tells the Soul Society to prepare a company funeral for Ikkaku. However, Ikkaku does not feel despair. He only is filled with happiness throughout the fight. Meanwhile, Grimmjow's presence alone freaks out Rukia and she tells Ichigo to immediately retreat. Before she can react though, Grimmjow just shoves his arm right through her chest. Back to Ikkaku though, he is being pushed to his limits to where he says a legendary word, and that word is Bankai. His Bankai's name is Ryuman Hozukimaru, and it looks absolutely sick. Pretty much the Bankai is not even at full power upon release, but as the two opponents exchange blows, it wakes up and reaches maximum damage. Ikkaku kills his opponent, but from the damage he had taken throughout the fight, he had fallen to the ground. While wounded on the ground, he thinks back to his past. He remembers back when he dueled Kenpachi Zaraki. However, Kenpachi refused to finish Ikkaku off. And while at first Ikkaku took offense to this, Kenpachi caused Ikkaku to realize he had a lucky break, and that since he has survived, he should now live and dedicate himself to killing the one who left him alive. Right after this, Ikkaku thinks about back when Renji begged him to be a captain. However, Ikkaku once again refused, as his dream had changed since his fight against Kenpachi. It had been reforged, and his new dream was to fight and die as Zaraki's subordinate. Meanwhile, Renji and Toshiro are being absolutely destroyed in their fights. In fact, Renji is being so destroyed that Uru senses Renji's opponent as a danger and immediately goes rage mode against him. However, she underestimates the Arrancar's strength because as the Arrancar releases, he is able to quickly stab Uru in the chest. Jinta quickly jumps up to save Uru, and Renji uses his Bankai and body to protect them as they escape. Meanwhile, Toshiro continues to get destroyed in his fight, and Rangiku, who is in another fight on the roof near Toshiro, is already perceived to not be breathing. But in fact, she is breathing, and in fact, she is in contact with the Soul Society secretly right now. As Toshiro's fight continues though, they eventually exchange information. His opponent tells him that Arrancars 11 and above are in order of creation, but 1 through 10 are in order of strength, and are called the Espada. The one fighting Ichigo right now is Espada number 6, and in fact Grimmjow at that moment had just forced Ichigo to go Bankai. As Toshiro, Renji, and Rangiku have all been pushed to their limits, Rangiku finally gets permission for everyone to remove their seals, because Gentei Kaijo has been approved. Within seconds of the seal being removed, all three almost instantly absolutely destroy their opponents. However, after it, they were all exhausted and fell to the ground extremely injured. The only battle still going on now is Grimmjow versus Ichigo, and Ichigo's Bankai is doing absolutely nothing to Grimmjow. Ichigo was unable to do any damage until he used a Getsugo Tensho, which barely damaged Grimmjow. However, the inner hollow begins to seep in every time he uses a Getsuga. This causes Ichigo to struggle, but one of the key moments is while Ichigo is fighting, Tatsuki is secretly watching the battle. As Grimmjow is about to finish off Ichigo, a portal opens up behind him, and Kaname stops Grimmjow from moving to take him back to Wako Mundo for attacking the world of the living without permission. As they both leave, Grimmjow threatens Ichigo's life and goes home with Kaname. After the battle, Renji tells Ichigo he won, however Ichigo reaffirms Renji that he lost. Meanwhile, Ikkaku and Yumichika end up living with Kaigo and Kaigo's sister, and all the injured end up getting healed. At Wako Mundo, Grimmjow loses an arm in his position as the Sixth Espada for his punishment. Gin then has a conversation with Aizen in private about how he caught Aizen manipulating Grimmjow and Kaname during the judgment phase. Throughout the entire event, Ryu continues to train with his father, and the following day, Chad goes to Kisuke to gain strength, as he wants to be able to help Ichigo. And Ichigo, after thinking about the whole day, finally ends up going to the Vizards for training, as he doesn't want to be overwhelmed by his inner hollow. Shinji thinks that Ichigo wants to join the Vizards, however Ichigo wants to use Shinji. Kinda sus, not gonna lie. Anyway, Ichigo wants to force Shinji into training him to control his inner hollow, and he immediately jumps into attacking him. They both fight each other, barely even trying. However, this is when Hiyori punches Shinji out of the way and uses her mask. She then tells Ichigo if he doesn't use his mask, then he is going to be dead meat, and that she will drag it out. Ichigo refuses to do Bankai, as it will give his inner hollow more control. However, in Shikai, Hiyori is just absolutely destroying him, and Ichigo is absolutely unable to hold his inner hollow back. However, the second the inner hollow took control, Hiyori began to be choked and almost died, until in a flash, every Vizard pinned Ichigo to the ground. It is here when the Vizards agreed to train Ichigo, and as Ichigo trains for a little bit, he finally begins a true battle against his inner hollow. The Vizard Haichi creates a force field, and Shinji forces Ichigo to become a hollow all the way. Ichigo awakens inside of his inner world. This time, however, the old man is completely missing, and as Ichigo asks where Zangetsu is, White says that he is Zangetsu, and begins to clash with Ichigo. Meanwhile, in the world of the living, Ichigo has now holified, and each Vizard is taking turns and fighting him. In Ichigo's spirit world, they both have gone Bankai. Ichigo continues to fight White back and forth, and he is absolutely destroying Ichigo. This is where White gives his famous speech about a killer's instinct. After this speech, Ichigo awakens where he is now facing off against one of his past battles, Kenpachi Zuraki. But this time, Kenpachi fights Ichigo while giving him a speech about instinctively seeking battles, as it's the only way to gain powers. It's this speech that helps Ichigo wake up from the Kenpachi fight and stab White directly in the chest, as Ichigo had the killer instinct that he needed to have. As White surrenders the crown to Ichigo, he makes an important note that the second he senses weakness in Ichigo, he will throw him off and crush his skull, meaning he'll take control. White also says that if Ichigo really wants to control his powers, then until he meets him next time, make sure to not get killed. After Ichigo awakens in the normal world, he collapses onto the ground and has a conversation with Shinji. Meanwhile, during this event of training, Ohime catches Toshiro in a room with a new device. This device is an emergency link to the head captain of the Gotai 13, Genryusei Yamamoto, and it just so happens that they have just discovered Aizen's objective. They have discovered that Aizen will make a key to the Soul King's palace called the Oken. He can do this by sacrificing Karakura Town, 100,000 souls to be exact. Ohime is then given the objective to give this information to Ichigo Kurosaki. But before the transmission ends, Toshiro has a conversation with Momo. She is still under the illusion that Aizen is being forced to carry out these evil acts. Meanwhile, Renji is training Chad with his Bankai at Kisuke's shop, while Ichigo is training his Hollow Mask with the Vizards. Both are making absolutely amazing progress when Ohime finds the Visor's hideout. She slips through the barrier with ease and explains everything to Ichigo. However, instantly after hearing everything, Ichigo just goes straight back to training. This literally motivates Ohime to get stronger as well, and she is immediately picked up by Yoichi and then is told by Kisuke that she will not be fighting them in the war. Meanwhile, Uryu has finally regained his powers after being shot by an arrow from his father, and Aizen has now taken interest in Ohime's abilities. As Ohime leaves anxious and upset, she runs into Rukia, and she has a very ranting conversation with Rukia until she is kidnapped by Hiyori. She becomes friends with Haichi as she slipped through Haichi's barrier. Haichi helps her out and heals Tsubaki back to normal health, and after this, Ohime goes to the Soul Society to train with Rukia. With all this going on, quite a few things are happening in Hueco Mundo. For starters, Aizen made a special Arrancar named Wonderweiss. Yami had a surgery to get his arm reattached, and Aizen is once again sending multiple Arrancars to the world of the living. The Arrancars that are going are Grimmjow, Luffy, Yami, Wonderweiss, and Ukiura. However, upon their arrival, Ukiura is not shown to be present. Grimmjow immediately leaves to go search for Ichigo and fight him, while Yami and Toshiro begin to battle, and Luffy takes on the other Shinigami present. After a quick bit, Ichigo and Grimmjow finally run into each other, and Ichigo immediately goes all out with a mask and all, ready to fight Grimmjow. The Soul Society is alerted, and all 4 Arrancars in the world of the living are confirmed to be Espadas. Meanwhile, Rukia heads to the world of the living, and Renji and Chad are too tired to go, so Kisuke goes in their stead. Back to the main battle, Toshiro changes targets to Luffy. When Luffy uses all of his arms, he absolutely destroys Toshiro and causes Toshiro to fall to the ground. Anyway, back to Ichigo, Grimmjow is nearly defeated. Ichigo is absolutely destroying Grimmjow until his mask breaks. The second it breaks, Grimmjow is able to completely turn the tides of the battle. However, in the same moment, Luffy is about to kill Rangiku when Kisuke uses his Shikai to cut one of the tentacles. Kisuke then is attacked by Wonderweiss, however he stops the attack with ease. Back to Ohime, she is running inside the Dangai with 2 Shinigami when Ukiura comes out of nowhere. Ohime immediately tries to convince the 2 bodyguards to run away, however they are severely injured before they can even take a step. Ukiura then commands Ohime to come with him. If she refuses, he will kill all of her friends. She has no rights. This is not a negotiation, it's an order. Back to Kisuke. Kisuke is now fighting Yami and is just chilling, kind of acting laid back, as Luffy recaptures the Shinigami and is about to attack Rangiku once again. This is when he is frozen solid from Toshiro. Toshiro has spent the time preparing and getting stronger in those few minutes by gathering all the water in the atmosphere. Meanwhile, Kisuke continues to play with Yami while Ichigo is being demolished by Grimmjow. Rukia rushes to Ichigo to attempt to aid Ichigo and freeze Grimmjow, however Grimmjow with ease breaks the ice and grabs her head, preparing a Sero. But right before he can release that Sero, Shinji comes in and saves the day. Casually, Shinji puts on his mask and is fairly easily handling Grimmjow. However, after a few blows, Shinji gets serious by using his Sero. Grimmjow at this point is nearly dead from the blast. However, before getting a chance to release and continue the fight, Ukiura picks him up and takes the rest of the Arrancars home. This includes Luffy, who is frozen solid. The following night, Ohime visits Ichigo as she is given permission to say goodbye to a single person. However, they cannot sense her presence. It is here where she admits her love to a sleeping Ichigo and heals his injuries. She says goodbye and leaves. After Ichigo wakes up, he is summoned to the emergency link and is told from Ukitake that Ohime was either killed or abducted. However, he tells them that she healed him last night when he was asleep, as his unhealable wrist was healed. This has a terrible effect on the captains though, as Yamamoto now believes that she has betrayed everyone. Renji tries to convince Yamamoto to let him go take Ohime home. However, Yamamoto sends Byakuya and Kenpachi to take the Shinigami home, and even orders for Ichigo to not go either. The following day, Ichigo is depressed at school, and in a way he does not act his usual self to his friends. In fact, he believes that he severed them as friends. Luckily that night, Ichigo did not listen to Yamamoto though, and with the help of Kisuke, he goes to Hueco Mundo with Chad and Uryu. Unknown to Ichigo though, Tatsuki and 2 of his other friends were watching them leave for Hueco Mundo at Kisuke's shop. Meanwhile, Ohime arrives in Hueco Mundo and Luffy is pissed that their battle was just a diversion to kidnap a single human. Aizen looks at Luffy and has Ohime heal Grimjow's arm back to normal. As Grimjow's arm is healed, he also has her heal his burn number, and then he kills Luffy, reclaiming the seat of Six Espada. Meanwhile, in the world of the living, we learn that Ishina has made contact with Ryukin. However, they have known each other at some point in the past, as they talk as if they are very familiar. Meanwhile, Ichigo, Chad, and Uryu arrive in Hueco Mundo and are stopped by two Arrancars. While initially Ichigo steps forward, Chad and Uryu tell him to step back as Chad and Uryu approach their opponents. At first they are having difficulties. Chad struggles to match his opponent's speed, while Uryu struggles to match his opponent's ability that disrupts the reishi around him. So they end up switching opponents, which allows them to quite easily defeat the two Arrancars. As soon as the Arrancars are defeated, the room they are in begins to self-destruct. Luckily though, the three of them barely escape, barely making it to the empty desert above. It is here where they can see Las Noches, Aizen's castle in the far distance. They begin to run towards it. Meanwhile, their entrance does not go unnoticed, and Aizen has a massive meeting with the Espada. Throughout the meeting, Aizen tells the Espada not to overestimate them, but that there's no need for accessing alarm either. Just wait for them to come to you, and that as long as you're with Aizen, no one can defeat you. Grimjow tries to leave early, but Aizen stops him by looking at him and using some spiritual pressure. Meanwhile, as they run towards Las Noches, Ichigo spots multiple hollows chasing what appears to be a human girl. After kindly saving her, they find out that she is an Arrancar. As they are riding, the Arrancar discovers Ichigo is a Soul Reaper and freaks out. However, before Bawa Bawa can stop, they get stopped by Runuganga of the White Sand. They are trapped until he gets turned into ice by Rukia Kuchiki. Ruki and Renji have officially arrived inside of Hueco Mundo, and together with them, the group breaks into the palace called Las Noches. Meanwhile, Ukiura is manipulating Ohime once again, telling her that Ichigo has arrived, and then forcing her to submit to Sosuke Aizen. Back to Ichigo and the gang as they break in, Ichigo tells Nell and her friends to stay outside. Inside the palace there's a 5-room split, so each member of the group picks a door and splits to cover the most ground. Nell and her friends however go after Ichigo, but her friends get lost and pick different rooms by accident. Meanwhile, Aizen summons Ohime and shows her the Hokyoku. Aizen wants her to use her power to help him. Her denial of events, her destruction of a phenomenon itself. Everything. It is here where Ohime chooses her mission, and that mission is to destroy the Hokyoku. Nell finally catches up to Ichigo as they continue to run. They run into an Arrancar named Dordoni. However, this is not a normal Arrancar, this is a Primavera and Espada, an old Espada that has received a demotion. They end up fighting for a bit, and Dodorni really wants Ichigo to use his Bankai. However, Ichigo refuses to use his Bankai against someone who isn't even a current Espada. Dordoni understands this, but he doesn't want to be underestimated, so he goes into his release form. In this form, Dordoni easily gains the upper hand. Ichigo, barely being able to hold his own, eventually is cornered as Dordoni releases a Sero. However, Nell eats the Sero and redirects it. Because this, Dordoni attacks Nell. This time around, Ichigo goes straight into Bankai so that he can protect her from Dordoni. However, even in Bankai, Ichigo was still taking his time to fight Dordoni. Because of this, and mostly because of Dordoni begging, Ichigo uses his mask for just a second. And a second is all he needs, because with it he instantly defeats Dordoni in a single slash. By using Nell's saliva, Ichigo is then able to save Dordoni as it has some healing properties. Dordoni shows Ichigo a side of the Arrancar that he had no idea existed. He explained how Espada are loyal servants of Aizen, but how Aizen only sees them as weapons. He explained how he still wants to be an Espada again, but right after, he pretends to be evil still and attacks Ichigo. Ichigo easily escapes the room, and as a bunch of army units arrive, I'm not going to say the actual term because I know I can't pronounce it, Dordoni holds these troops off to protect Ichigo. Meanwhile, Chad and Ryu are also fighting Primavera and Espadas of their own. Ryu is shooting arrows constantly as Primavera and Espada, but is struggling for quite a bit. He is fairly injured, however his opponent doesn't even have a single scar. This is when Pesce enters and is instantly attacked by the Arrancar's weapon. However, Pesce uses his juices, causing the enemy to slip and fall. This causes the Arrancar to use her release as she is absolutely pissed. Ryu is constantly being forced to avoid every single attack. He dodges consistently for quite some time until he decides to pull out his new weapon called the Seal Schneider. It is the only Quincy weapon that has a blade. Using this blade that's actually a bow and arrow, Ryu easily claims victory and defeats his Puravarana Espada. Meanwhile, Chad also defeats his Puravarana Espada by using Diablo, his new left arm. It was a fairly quick battle, and in this battle he breaks down a wall in his finishing hit to reveal one of the actual Espadas. Espada number 5, Nanoitra, and within only mere seconds, Chad gets defeated by Nanoitra. Meanwhile, Ohime has been refusing to eat, so Ukiura threatens to tie her down and force feed her. Oh yeah, he also says her friends are going to be slaughtered and then gets slapped for it. Meanwhile, Rukia has ran into the 9th Espada, who for some strange reason looks like Kaien Shiba. Kaien tells Rukia that night his spirit body began to decay after Rukia killed him, and he was transported straight into Hueco Mundo. The Hollow was one of Aizen's experiments, and it was designed to reconstruct itself. It took Kaien's form, however unknown, the mind that controlled the body was not the Hollow, it was Kaien's. Kaien keeps reminding Rukia that she is the one that originally killed him, and says that she should be ready to pay with her life for murdering him. Rukia agrees to this punishment, however she won't let him kill her until Ohime is safe. As the tension rose, Kaien says it was just a joke and plays it off, however he turns around and says, "You can bring me all the heads of your friends to atone for what you did." This time Rukia knows that he was not joking, and immediately goes to Shikai, as she is absolutely pissed. Meanwhile, Renji falls into a pit with Suzailaporo Grands, the 8th Espada. Renji immediately tries to go Bankai, however Grands engineered the room to seal specifically Renji's Bankai. Meanwhile, Rukia begins fighting Aranero, and they go back and forth until eventually he uses Kaien Shikai, and it appears almost like a trident. Rukia is beginning to lose drastically. In fact, she lands in a pickle that only her Kido manages to get her out of. The fake Kaien dodges the Kido, however as it hits the back room, it causes light to enter the room. She then comes up with a plan and paralyzes Aranero, then breaking the light to shine above him, revealing his true form. It is now revealed that what actually happened was that he consumed the Hollow that consumed Kaien, which gave him the power and the form of Kaien Shiba. You see, Aranero had the ability to consume dead hollows and take their spirit energy and abilities. Right after revealing this, Aranero uses his release, breaks Rukia's Zanpakuto, and then stabs Rukia with his trident-like Zanpakuto. As Rukia is dying on the trident, she thinks back to her history with Kaien, when Kaien was teaching her about the heart. Specifically, Kaien believed that when one died, they left their heart with their friends, which is why one should never die alone. Kaien left his heart with Rukia, not Aranero. This gives Rukia the strength to raise her Zanpakuto and use the third dance, reforging her Zanpakuto inside of Aranero's head. After killing Aranero, Rukia tries to crawl on the ground and save Ohime, but she is far too weak and passes out from her injuries. All the Espada have noticed Aranero's death thanks to one of Aranero's abilities. Renji hears about it and tries to defeat Grands even more as he wants to go save Rukia, but he is far too weak. Meanwhile, Ichigo realizes that Rukia is in danger, and right as he figures it out, he stumbles across Ukiura. Although at first Ichigo just ignores Ukiura and starts walking towards Rukia as he wants to save her, Ukiura tells Ichigo that he was the one that brought Ohime to Hueco Mundo. Immediately, Ichigo starts fighting Ukiura, only this time he is using Bankai and his mask. Still though, Ukiura is barely affected. With ease, Ukiura is absolutely destroying Ichigo, and as Ichigo looks for a glimmer of hope, thinking Ukiura was the strongest Espada, Ukiura reveals that he is only the 4th Espada. It is in this moment that Ukiura stabs his arm into Ichigo's chest and walks away. Meanwhile, as Ichigo's group is getting smaller and smaller, Uryu arrives to aid Renji against Grands. And while all this is going on, 2 of Rancars sneak into Ohime's room and begin beating her up. Ohime is refusing to fight back, and as they continually beat on her, Grimmjow enters the room. Grimmjow absolutely destroys the two girls with ease. He even abuses one of them a bit too much, one could say. He wants Ohime to come with him somewhere. She reluctantly agrees, but first heals the two girl Rancars back to full health. Meanwhile, Ryu and Renji with strategy begin to absolutely demolish Granz. Granz is nearly defeated until he grabs one of his Fracione and starts eating the furball thing. You see, it's been engineered to completely allow him to recover. Granz then decides to leave them, to simply change his clothes. Meanwhile, Grimmjow takes Ohime to Ichigo and has her heal him to full health. This is when Ukiura appears behind them and asks what is he doing. They immediately begin to fight, however Grimmjow uses a sealing item given to everyone by Lord Aizen. It will keep Ukiura sealed in a prison for about 2 to 3 hours, and it is successfully used. Grimmjow and Ichigo then begin to fight, and the battle is absolutely legendary. Ichigo is pushed back just a little bit when Grimmjow uses the Grand Reisero. Because of this, Ichigo notices that it will hit Ohime too, and pulls out his mask so that he can quickly protect Ohime. Grimmjow then enters his release state, which turns him into a panther-like human being, and is pretty even with Ichigo throughout the following attacks. As the fight continues, Ohime begins to fear the mask that Ichigo has. Remembering her brother, she begins to tense up. Even in the battle, Ichigo begins to lose, as his mask has slowly been breaking and has been reaching its limit. This is all until Nell convinces Ohime to cheer Ichigo on. Ohime tells Ichigo to not die and just to not get hurt anymore. This gives Ichigo the ability to turn the tables and get a really good strike in there. We then receive a flashback from Grimmjow. In this flashback, we learn that Grimmjow became the king of a group of hollows that wish to become Basto Lordes. Grimmjow just continues to fight Ichigo as he is angry because Ichigo views himself as an equal to Grimmjow. Grimmjow says anybody who looks down on him will be crushed. They fight and fight, and it's revealed that a piece of Ichigo did come here to defeat Grimmjow, Ukiura, and Aizen, and that he will be taking all of his friends home, and in that moment, Ichigo defeats Grimmjow. Grimmjow then just gets back up, refusing to lose, however he is far too weak to fight. This is when he randomly gets attacked from the side by none other than Nanoitra, the 5th Espada. Nanoitra immediately starts fighting Ichigo and has his Fracione capture Ohime. Meanwhile, Granz has returned to fight Ryu and Renji. Granz immediately goes into his release state this time around, which looks very weird to say the least. He then releases this black jizz stuff that duplicates everything it touches, causing them to fall into quite the predicament as it touches literally everyone. Meanwhile, Ichigo is still losing at an alarming rate against Nanoitra when he claims to know who Nell is. He calls her Nelliel, a former Espada. Nell has no memory of this, as it appears she had memory loss from the crack in her skull. This crack being caused by Nanoitra. Nanoitra starts attacking Nell, but Ichigo tries to protect her. Only now, Ichigo might die. Nell freaks out and instantly transforms into a hot anime waifu that causes Redditors to go mad. Nell uses her hot anime powers to save Ichigo, and then reaffirms him, saying that the fight will be over quickly, that it is her turn to protect him, and then revealing her rank as the former 3rd Espada. She immediately starts fighting and absolutely destroys Nanoitra, however she definitely underestimates him just a bit. Meanwhile, Renji destroys the palace so that they have more room to fight. He does this by saying Bankai, so then all of his clones go Bankai, and then the palace just cannot sustain the amount of Bankais it's trying to counter. This causes Granz to just decide to destroy all the clones because he just wants to fight them himself. He's kind of bored of the tricks with the clones. So Granz has one of his drip-looking thingy weird things suck Ryu up. This creates a cursed doll of Ryu that sends damage to its user when it's damaged. The doll even has small organs that he can use to destroy as he pleases. Anyway, back to Nell. We are currently seeing their past duels. Nell is dueling Nanoitra in the past when she refuses to finish him off. She says that he is a beast, that she does not recognize him as a warrior. She refuses to burden herself with his life. Later, Nanoitra says to someone else that you can't stand the idea of a woman defeating a man in battle. So soon after, he ends up destroying Dodorni's and Pesce's masks. And then we see Nell's mask destroyed. Granz and Anoitra are working together to accomplish this. Neo's body is turned into a child as Ryatsu is constantly leaking out of her skull, and as she wakes up, she doesn't remember anything. So Dodorni and Pesce pledge to protect them, and then in the present we see Pesce and Dodorni help Renji and Uryu. Meanwhile, Neo just released her Zanpakuto. This resurrection turns her into a centaur-like thing. She has a lance that she can throw as well and continues to fight Anoitra until she has him cornered. Everyone thinks that she is going to win. However, in the moment it matters, she turns back into a child. Ichigo tries to jump in to protect Nell, however he is instantly destroyed and easily defeated. Everything seems hopeless as Nanoitra's Fracione is dealing with Ichigo, however in the nick of time, Kenpachi jumps in and saves the day. Meanwhile, Zamari the 7th Espada has come to finish off Rukia. Guards have appeared around Chad and the Previon Espada, and Granz just defeated Nell's Fracione. Kenpachi instantly defeats Tesla and then moves on to Nanoitra. Meanwhile, Unohana arrives to save Chad. Mayuri appears in front of Granz, and Byakuya appears before Zamari can finish Rukia off. Byakuya's battle becomes one of speed, however it is clear that Byakuya is outclassing Zamari entirely. Zamari ends up releasing and becomes a beautiful pumpkin with some gross eye things. Quickly, Zamari takes control of Byakuya's leg. By looking at anything, Zamari can take control of that very thing. Quickly, Byakuya cuts the tendon of his leg to prevent Zamari's use of it. After this, out of nowhere, Hinata enters the room, and Byakuya immediately tells him to back away. As things stand, he does not know if he can keep Hinata out of this fight. Zamari then takes control of Rukia Kuchiki and threatens her life. However, Byakuya paralyzes her body using Aikido, and then drops his Zanpakuto to activate his Bankai. For how can 50 eyes hope to control 100 million blades? Byakuya has them all attack Zamari at once, and Zamari barely survives. He immediately uses his control attack against Byakuya, however Byakuya uses Bakudo number 81 Danku just in time to create a shield to protect him. Zamari starts begging for mercy and proclaims the hypocrisy of the Shinigami. This is when Byakuya finishes Zamari off and says, "What makes you think I'm acting as a Soul Reaper? I'm going to slay you because you aimed your blade at my only pride." Following the defeat of Zamari, Asane arrives to help them with the injuries. Meanwhile, Mayuri is on the ground after having multiple organs crushed. Everything begins to seem hopeless, however Mayuri quickly reveals that he was only joking, as he had already replaced all of his organs with dummies. Granz then takes Nemu as a hostage, freaking out a little bit. However, Mayuri doesn't care and uses Bankai, commanding it to just simply eat Granz. Luckily or unluckily for Granz, he has an ability to regrow himself by using eggs he implants in individuals. He can regrow himself. He used Nemu in this task. He calls this perfection, saying that this is the perfect life form. He then uses his main body to invade the nervous system of Mayuri's Bankai, however Mayuri has it self-destruct before the Bankai can be used against him. After this, Mayuri tells Granz that his new drug is already in his system, as he had used Nemu's body to regrow. This drug makes 1 second feel like 100 years, and with this Mayuri is able to easily kill Granz, forcing him into having to watch a sword stab him in the heart for a whole century. After finishing Granz off, Granz gives his famous perfection speech, and how perfection is something he despises, and how for scientists is a dead end. He then revives Nemu through age restriction means, and enters Granz's laboratory. Meanwhile, Nanoitra is currently fighting Kenpachi, and so far has proven to be uncuttable for Kenpachi. Nanoitra has the upper hand. This is until Kenpachi gets used to Nanoitra's hardness and can now cut him. The fight begins to become more even until Nanoitra accidentally cuts Kenpachi's eye patch off. The pure strength pushes Nanoitra to his limit and forces Nanoitra to release to just simply stay alive. Upon releasing, Nanoitra cuts Kenpachi down, causing Kenpachi to absolutely collapse. Then Nanoitra turns to attack Yachiru. This makes Kenpachi get up even stronger than before and start fighting Nanoitra once again. They go back and forth, and Kenpachi realizes that if he doesn't start using Kendo, then he might die and not be able to enjoy any more battles in the future, so he strikes Nanoitra down by just simply using his second hand. This absolutely destroys Nanoitra. Then Ninoitra begins to beg Kenpachi to finish him off as he is now stuck on the ground. We then learn how much Ninoitra despises to be pitied through another flashback, and through another one we learn that Ninoitra wants to die in battle, that he wants to face the ultimate opponent, that he wants life to have fled his body before it hits the ground. Back in the present, the second Ninoitra dies, Coyote Stark appears and takes Ohime away. Aizen announces to the entirety of Wako Mundo that he is now leaving to destroy Karakura Town, and that if they want Ohime, he will leave her in the 5th tower. It is discovered that he planned this from the very beginning, that the Soul Society recognized the strength of Ohime, which is how he was able to trap 4 captains in Wako Mundo. We then switch to Kenpachi, who tells Ichigo that the old man issued 2 orders. The first was to send a few captains to Wako Mundo, however the second was for the captains of all 13 guard companies to prepare to fight in Karakura Town. With Kisuke's help, they sent the real Karakura Town and its citizens to the Soul Society, and replaced it with a fake. This is when Aizen appears with the remaining Espada and their Fracion in the fake Karakura Town, leaving only 2 Espadas in Wako Mundo, Yami and Ukiura. 110 years ago, the world of Bleach was way different. It was a normal captain promotion ceremony where we see Shinji getting ready to go to a new captain ceremony. He is with his lieutenant Sosuke Aizen and walks toward it. We then hear a conversation about Squad Zero and their status as the Royal Guard. After this, the new captain arrives and is revealed to be none other than Kisuke Urahara. Kisuke's lieutenant Hiyori is struggling to accept him as her new captain, as she misses her old captain. This bothers Kisuke until Shinji has a talk with him that convinces Kisuke to stop trying to fit in, but be himself. As Shinji leaves, he sees Aizen stalking them and has a very brief, direct conversation with him. The next day, Kisuke starts building the first room of the research and development program, and when Hiyori enters the room, he asks her if she will come to the Maggot's Nest with him. As they enter the Maggot's Nest, we learn that the members of the facility have done nothing wrong. They were only branded as dangerous elements and thrown into the dungeon. Inside of the dungeon, members can move about freely but are not allowed to leave. Kisuke explains how his goal is to help these dangerous people become useful. However, they are attacked. Kisuke with ease pacifies the attacker though with a single hand. They then enter a hallway that is prison-like. Inside is none other than Mayuri Kurasuchi, and Kisuke wants him to leave with them. Kisuke offers Mayuri the rank of Assistant Director of the Research and Development Program. Mayuri only joins because under the conditions, if Kisuke dies, everything goes to Mayuri. Meanwhile, Byakuya is playing tag with Yoichi, and Ukitake is talking with Kain about a new prodigy. We then see Sosuke Aizen approach Gin Ichimaru for the first time, who had just killed the 3rd seat of their squad. 9 years later, across the Soul Society, strange deaths have been occurring, but it's weird as their clothes are not becoming reishi, so the conclusion is that for some strange reason, these individuals are just unable to retain their living form. This is when the Soul Society sends an investigation team consisting of specifically Lieutenant Mashiro, Captain Kensei, Kaname, and a few other unimportant named characters. Kensei then saves a child version of Shuhei Hisagai from a holo, and then cheers the kid up. This is when Mashiro discovers the clothing of the advanced unit. They end up deciding to camp out, and this is where Shuhei sees the 69 on Kensei's chest. That very night though, the team was destroyed and defeated by Tozen. The head captain immediately creates a task force. Captain Rose, Shinji, Love, and Lieutenant Haichi and Lisa are on their way. It just so happens that Hiyori is already on their way, as Kisuke had sent her previously without knowing about the dangers. As the group arrives, they begin fighting a fully holified Kensei. They attempt to stop Kensei, however, as they fight, a holified Mashiro appears behind them and slams Rose to the ground. Haichi tries to seal them, however, Kensei breaks his seal with physical strength alone. Meanwhile, under direct orders not to by head captain Yamamoto, Kisuke and Tessai begin to go help save the team, using cloaks to hide their Ryatsu. Back to the main team, Hiyori holifies and loses control. This is when Tozen starts attacking him, and Aizen and Gin have arrived as well. Shinji says that he knew about Aizen the whole time, however Aizen knew that Shinji was suspicious of him and planned around it. Shinji never chose him as his assistant captain, he chose Shinji. He then holifies the entire team's group. When Kisuke arrives on the scene, he and Tessai try to stop Aizen. However, easily Aizen escapes. They end up using Forbidden Kido to arrive back in Kisuke's laboratory, where Kisuke pulls out a stone known as the Hokyoku. Kisuke tells Tessai that with this is their only chance of surviving and losing their holification capabilities. Later, Kisuke fails, and as soon as he steps outside, him and Tessai are arrested. Kisuke tries to tell them what happened, but they were not listening to him. Luckily though, Yoichi quickly comes in and saves Tessai and Kisuke. Kisuke ends up hiding in the world of the living, promising to dedicate his life to save the Vizards. Meanwhile, back in the normal timeline, the Vizards have now all departed to help the Shinigami defeat Sosuke Aizen. Yamamoto immediately uses his Shikai to surround Aizen, Kaname, and Gin in a barrier of flames, separating them from their Espada subordinates. Meanwhile, in Wako Mudo, Ukiura talks with Ohime and asks if she is frightened. She denies and says she is not afraid and that her heart is already with them. Rukia, Shad, and Renji are all dealing with enemies for Ichigo to allow him to reach Ohime quicker. Ukiura talks to Ohime about the heart, asking what exactly it is, saying what cannot be seen does not exist. Will he find it if he crushes her skull? And as he says this, Ichigo Kurosaki breaks into the tower and starts fighting with Ukiura. Meanwhile, in the war zone, Baragon takes charge and deploys an Arrancar at each pillar, telling them to destroy the pillars. These pillars, when destroyed, will revert the swap with the fake Kakura town and the one in the Soul Society. Luckily though, Yamamoto thought ahead and had deployed Shuhei, Kira, Yumichika, and Ikaku on defending the pillars. Charlotte and Yumichika begin to fight each other, calling each other ugly. Eventually, Charlotte releases an absolute anger. This release causes Charlotte to look funny to Yumichika, so Yumichika just bursts out laughing, and eventually Yumichika is forced to release his own Zanpakuto. This is when Charlotte uses a technique that makes it so no one can see their fight. However, this is perfect, as it allows Yumichika to use his full power, that he has to hide from his squad. With this power, the battle is just quickly finished. It is then revealed that Yumichika only uses his partial Shikai because he does not want the squad to see his full power, thus forcing him to hide that power, which is why he thanks Charlotte for hiding him from his squad. Meanwhile, Shuhei's opponent is attacking at the strength of a 5th seat, then changing to a 4th seat, and then a 3rd, and then finally assistant captain. Meanwhile, strategically, Izuru uses Kido to maneuver around. While using Mobisuke's power, he strikes his opponent's feathers 4 times, forcing his opponent to be unable to fly from the pure weight of his wings. Then using his Zanpakuto to behead his opponent. Shuhei's opponent, Findor, pushes him back until he finally releases his Zanpakuto. Shuhei then defeats Findor after Findor becomes the supposed strength of a captain. Shuhei remarks how he was taught to fear the blade that he holds. Everything seems like a victory until Ikaku's pillar breaks as he was defeated. Immediately, Kamamura jumps down to fight the Arrancar, and with just his bare fist, Kamamura flips the giant and then goes Bankai, instantly defeating the Arrancar. Iba then yells at Ikaku about not using his full power and not putting his duty first, not winning no matter what. And as all the Fraccion's defeat reaches Baragon, things begin to change. The battles all begin. Yamamoto begins the main attack, commanding everyone to fight. Shunsui fights Stark, Toshiro fights Haribel, Rangiku fights Haribel's Fracione, Omaida and Soifone fights Baragon's Fraciones. The war has now truly begun. All the battles are going relatively well. Soifone and Omaida both go Shikai, and while Omaida defeats his opponent, Soifone appears to be losing against hers, so Omaida jumps in to help. However, Soifone reveals that she was not even trying and was just testing the Arrancar's strength. Immediately as she reveals this, she kills the Arrancar in what appears to be a single strike, but what was actually 2 strikes with her Shikai. Meanwhile, Rangiku is struggling against her 3 opponents when an explosion comes out of nowhere. The source of it is none other than Momo. Momo easily turns the tides of the fight. Her strategy is attached to her Shikai, forces all 3 of them to use their secret move to summon Aeon. Immediately, Rangiku loses half of her chest, and Momo is pushed to her limit. Everything seems hopeless until Izuru and Shuhei both arrive to save them. Meanwhile, Ukitake begins to fight Lynette, but he is not trying and desperately wants her to go home. Back to Shuhei and Izuru, Aeon is just making quick work of them, and things continue to seem hopeless as both are barely holding on in the fight, and this is when Yamamoto joins the battle, and with ease, Hatsumi Nadaguri's Aeon's existence. The three Fracción try to defeat Yamamoto after Aeon's losses, but in a single swing Yamamoto defeats them. Haribel then absolutely destroys Toshiro, and Stark reveals to Shunsui that he is the Primera Espada. Meanwhile, Ichigo finally confronts Ukiura and Wakamundo, and then we switch to Rukia's opponent releasing. This release allows him to grow soldiers like he is a tree. As he does this though, we see Ichigo fight back and forth with Ukiura, and he even manages to damage Ukiura a bit. This is where Ichigo asks Ukiura if he became more hollow, or if he can react because Ukiura became more human. This is when Ukiura begins to actually try in his fight, and as he's about to strike Ichigo badly, Hime blocks the attack with her shield. However, Ichigo tells her to step back and take cover, as he does not want her to get hurt. This is where Ichigo ends up wrapping his Zanpakuto in a Getsugo Tensho, but does not release it normally. He wraps it up in order to improve the strike rather than use it as a ranged attack. This is when Ohime is attacked by the two females from earlier, and following that, Yami appears. Yami wants to help Ukiura, however when Ukiura tells him no, he fights the two girls, instantly defeating them. Ohime is now by herself, however before she can get hurt, Uryu attacks Yami. Uryu absolutely destroys Yami. While Ichigo puts on his mask, he begins to push Ukiura to his limit. This causes Ukiura to run above the canopy above Las Noches as Ichigo follows. Ukiura reveals that espadas above 4 are not allowed to release under the canopy. Immediately Ukiura releases and begins to absolutely demolish Ichigo. In fact, if Ichigo did not instinctively use a Getsugo Tensho to block an attack, he would have been killed. With ease, Ukiura pushes Ichigo to his limit. In fact, he goes right next to Ichigo and tells him to fire a Getsuga to prove how hopeless his situation is. Ukiura then uses a Cero Ascursus. Meanwhile, Uryu takes Ohime to where Ukiura and Ichigo are fighting, and right before they arrive, Ichigo is badly hurt. He is talking about how different they are, how he and Arrancars are as different as heaven and hell. Ichigo continues to attempt to fight Ukiura, however Ukiura continues to say and explain how futile his fighting is. Ukiura cannot understand how Ichigo is so hopeful as he is the representation of nothingness. After Ichigo says he won't give up just because Ukiura is stronger than him, Ukiura decides to show him true despair and enters his second release. He explains how he is the only Espada with a second release, and how not even Lord Aizen has seen him in this release. Ukiura then asks him if this will to continue fighting is because he has a heart, and how as a result of having one, he is going to pay the ultimate price. He then creates a giant hole in Ichigo right after Ohime and Uryu arrive. Ichigo falls to ground with a lifeless body. As Ohime freaks out, she uses her shield to catch his body and tries to run to him. However, Ukiura stops her. Uryu then begins to fight Ukiura to allow Ohime to reach Ichigo. As Ohime reaches Ichigo, she begins to just have a mental breakdown, as she has no idea what on earth to do. And as Uryu begins to die from his fight against Ukiura, she cries out for Ichigo to help her. Ichigo can hear her cry for help and is completely taken control by his hollow side. Easily, Hollow Ichigo begins to absolutely demolish Ukiura, with absolutely no humanity. Ohime begins to question if this really is still Ichigo. After destroying Ukiura's arm, Ukiura regenerates the limb with ease. Ukiura then resorts to his ultimate attack, Lanza del Relampago. He misses, however, when he tries again, it is stopped with Ichigo's bare hand. Ichigo then cuts Ukiura down and is about to kill Ukiura. Ukiura, however, does not contain the heart Ichigo does, and just gives up, realizing that Ichigo has no mercy anymore, and that he has the instinct of a hollow. After Ichigo's Cero destroys his body, Ichigo is about to mutilate the body. However, Uryu stops Ichigo using his hand. Ichigo then attacks Uryu, badly injuring him, saying that he will protect Ohime. Ohime then realizes that this is all her fault as she watches him charge another Cero. This is when Ukiura charges at Ichigo with his remaining strength, which saves Uryu's life. Ichigo then returns to his normal human form. At this point, Ukiura's vital organs have been destroyed, therefore he knows that he is going to die. Ukiura then takes Ichigo's sword out of Uryu and throws at Ichigo, wanting to finish the battle. However, Ukiura begins to vanish and tells Ichigo to finish him off before it's too late. Ichigo, however, refuses to, as he does not want to win the battle like this. He also realizes that he is the one who hurt Ryu as well, and as Ukiura dies, he reaches out to Ohime and asks her if she is afraid of him. She tells him that she isn't, but before their hands touch, he vanishes to dust. However, in a moment before his death, he finally understands the meaning of the heart as he turns to nothingness. Meanwhile, below the canopy, Yami is fighting Rukia, Renji, and Chad, and then he releases his Zanpakuto and becomes a giant monster, revealing that he is secretly the Zeroth Espada. Back in the world of the living, Haribel is pushing Toshiro's Bankai to its absolute limit. She then enters a release state and cuts Toshiro in half. She then turns to Yamamoto saying that she will avenge her subordinates. However, unluckily for Haribel, Toshiro is not dead, as he was using an ice sculpture of himself. Meanwhile, Soifone is struggling against Baragon, as whenever she kicks him, her kick loses all of its speed. Baragon then reveals that all Espadas have an aspect of death, and now his is aging. He then touches Soifone's arm, breaking its bones. After this, he quickly releases into his resurrection, becoming a skeleton that's huge and looks like a king almost. In this resurrection, Baragon has the ability to age anything that's around him. His energy ends up touching Soifone's arm as she attempts to evade it, and immediately she has to have Omaida cut it off before it infects her entire body. Soifone then has Omaida act as a decoy to draw Baragon away as she has a secret plan up her sleeves. Meanwhile, Toshiro is going back and forth with Haribel until he is forced to use his ultimate attack. After all the water in the sky is his weapon. Hyoten Hakaso. Haribel tries to resist, however she fails and is sealed in a bunch of ice. As Toshiro does this, he apologizes to her, as she was unable to avenge the death of her subordinates. Back to Omaida. Omaida leads Baragon towards Soifone as she uses her Bankai, which is a giant nuke basically. Meanwhile, Stark is fighting Shinsui when he has just observed these two Bankais. He asks if Shinsui's Bankai is stronger than Toshiro's. After hearing yes back, this is when the battle becomes serious. Instantly, Stark wants to see Shinsui's Bankai and releases by combining with Lilinette. Stark then gains two guns, and in the meantime, Shinsui activates his Shikai. The fight continues as Shinsui is hit by the Seros from the guns. He manages to evade most of them, however he is turned to be forced to use his Bankai, but before he does it, Ukitake steps in to aid Shinsui by using his Shikai to absorb a Sero and fire it back. After all, Ukitake says to Shinsui that his Bankai should not be used where others can see it. After two more attacks, Stark figures out the full capacity of Ukitake's ability. Right after this, a Gargantia opens up as Wonderweiss and this giant creature is right behind him. Immediately, Wonderweiss stabs his arm through Ukitake, causing him to be unable to continue to aid Shinsui. Then Wonderweiss screams, and Haribel's ice is broken, and the flame prison around Aizen disrupts. However, before all becomes hopeless, the Visors arrive to help defeat Sosuke Aizen. Lisa ends up going to Shinsui, who is playing dead, and tells him to stop playing dead. Meanwhile, Shinji has a conversation with the head captain, as they were all led by Chojiro, and we learn that they are not allies of the Shinigami, but they are enemies of Aizen, and allies of Ichigo Kurosaki. Suddenly, as soon as Lisa and Shinji return to the other Visors, the giant monster starts throwing up a ton of Gillian Menos Grande. They all immediately mask up and start absolutely destroying the Menos Grande. Shinji then approaches Aizen and strikes. Immediately, Kaname dashes in to protect Aizen from Shinji, and as Shinji backs away a little bit, Kamamura enters the battle to deal with Kaname. He ends up fighting Kaname fairly far from Aizen, while leaving Aizen to Shinji. Hiyori and Lisa end up fighting with Toshiro, and Haichi ends up fighting with Soifone. Meanwhile, right after Mashiro's defeats the giant Hollow, Wonderweiss has an absolute breakdown and starts fighting Mashiro. Luckily, Mashiro immediately has the upper hand, and Hiyori and Toshiro start having a childish argument with each other, so Lisa just fights Haribel on her own. Meanwhile, Haichi tries to seal Baragon and Kido, however quickly even the Kido begins to age and disappear. Haichi then seals Baragon in a ton of spells so that Soifone can shoot her Bankai at him, and he can't project it away using his aging powers. However, it's important to note that Haichi had to promise to seal Kisuke for a month in order for Soifone to be willing to do this. However, even this was not enough to kill Baragon. He was damaged at the very least though. He then continues to battle Heichi as Heichi's arm gets hit. Heichi then puts his arm inside of Baragon, causing Baragon to age himself to dust. We then see a flashback of Aizen forcing Baragon to bend to Aizen's will and serve him with force. It is here where Baragon decided to kill Aizen using the new power he gave him. He views himself as a god and the king, and in his final moments he throws his axe not at Heichi, but at Lord Aizen. It fails to even touch him though. We then see Stark knows how number 2 died, but Aizen had nothing to say for it. Love then releases his Shikai and attacks Stark, and this is where Stark begins to get serious in their battle and uses his wolves. By using these wolves, Stark badly wounds Rose and Love, even after Rose uses his Shikai. They both just stand no chance. This is when Shunsui attacks Stark from his shadow. We learn that Shunsui Shikai's power is to turn children games into a reality. He has games like Taka and Oni, where the highest individual wins, and games like Kage and Oni, where whoever has their shadow stepped on loses. He also has a game called Ira Oni, where the user calls out a color, and if it's risky for you, you deal a lot more damage to your opponent. As this battle continues, Stark asks why he has to fight someone so strong. We learn that he envied the weak, that all of his friends had their souls diminished just by being with him, that this is why he divided his soul into two, as he was far too lonely. He wanted to be weak, or at least he wanted to have friends that were strong. This is the entire reason as to why he joined Lord Aizen, and as he thinks about all this stuff, he is killed as Shunsui yells black and strikes his hole. Pause. As Stark dies, he looks at Aizen and apologizes for not being able to repay his debt. And in this moment, he realizes that he is not alone anymore. We then see a flashback of when his soul was first split into Lilynette and Stark as they go on a journey together. Shunsui then is scolded for butting in on Love and Rose's battle, however he does not care, as in his eyes, losers focus too much on the means and lose sight on winning. Captains do not have this luxury, and how as soon as a war begins, everyone is evil. Aizen then cuts Haribel down after viewing the Espada as a failed experiment. Meanwhile, Mashiro's mask finally breaks while she fights Wonderweiss, and she is in trouble. Luckily, Kensei steps in and saves her like the little princess she is. Kensei then goes Bankai, and we switch back to Sosuke Aizen as he taunts the Vizards. This taunting causes Hiyori to carelessly charge at him as she is cut in half by Gin Ichimaru. Immediately, Shinji grabs her body and immediately realizes he needs Ohime as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in Wake Mundo, Yami has officially defeated Renji, Chad, and Rukia, and right before he finishes Rukia off, Ichigo arrives to fight. Ichigo lures Yami away from the three friends and then holifies, ready to destroy Yami. As Ichigo de-holifies, it feels incredibly weird though, and he is worried that because of his fight with Ukiura, his holification changed in some way. As the fight continues, Ichigo tries to holify one more time, however it fails for some strange reason. This is when Ichigo is captured, however Kenpachi and Byakuya arrive just in time to take Yami on. Mayuri then arrives with technology that can open a portal to Kamakura Town. Ichigo insists on staying, however Byakuya tells Ichigo that his duty is to protect this town, and to go. Unohana goes with Ichigo as they enter the Gargantua. They begin to have a conversation. We learn that Aizen's Kyoku Sugetsu only works on individuals who have seen his Shikai, and how the only individual that has any chance of joining the battle who can confront Aizen is Ichigo Kurosaki. While running, we learn that Ichigo has less than half of his spirit energy remaining, as his spirit energy is comparable to his Shihakusho, and that even at half strength, Ichigo is comparable to a captain. As this is going on, Byakuya and Kenpachi continue to fight against Yami. Meanwhile, in the world of the living, Shinji begins his battle with Aizen, and Aizen gives his famous speech on the illusion of trust. He talks about how trust is how all gods are born. Meanwhile, Kamamura and Kaname are preparing for their own battle. Kaname then reveals that he can holify and immediately cuts Shuhei down. This forces Kamamura to use his own Shikai. As the fight continues, Shuhei manages to pin Kaname down. We then see a flashback of Shuhei after his failure during a previous training exercise. Shuhei begs Kaname to dismiss him as a seated officer, as he is afraid to fight. However, in that moment, Kaname teaches Shuhei that power is not the most important thing in battle, but is the fear of battle. Continuing, he says that those who do not fear the very sword that they hold are not worthy of holding one, and that Shuhei has gained something invaluable to a warrior. Hisagai then begs Kaname to tell him why he threw away everything for power, and what he fears now. However, Tozen's response is simple, just to stab Hisagai. Following that, Kaname says he fears one thing, and that is dying as a Soul Reaper. Finally, this causes Kamamura to activate his Bankai. Meanwhile, Shinji continues to fight Aizen by activating his Shikai. Back to Kamamura, they continue fighting back and forth until eventually Kaname reveals that he became a Shinigami to seek revenge, that he believes virtue was not justice. He screams out that living in peace without avenging the dead is vice. Kamamura then realizes that he is going to have to defeat Kaname, that he cannot convince him with words. However, he makes sure Kaname knows that his heart has already forgiven him. However, this pisses Kaname as he activates his own resurrection. In this form, Kaname gains the ability to see, and for the first time he looks at Kamamura and tells him that he is even uglier than he imagined. As Kamamura begins to quickly lose to Kaname, he thinks about the past with Tozen and how close friends they were. And as Kaname goes in to finish Kamamura off, Hisagai uses his Shikai on Kaname's head, activating his Shikai to stab through the top of Kaname's mask. However, he notes that the old Kaname would have been able to dodge this attack easily. Meanwhile, we discover that Shinji's Shikai inverses everything. Left becomes right, and up becomes down. Front becomes back. Using this Shikai, Shinji gains the original upper hand. However, rather quickly, Aizen figures it out and calls it a Walmart brand great value version of his own Shikai. Meanwhile, back to Tozen dying, Kamamura, and Shuhei have a really emotional moment together when Aizen finishes Kaname off. This causes Kamamura to be filled with rage. However, right before he rushes in, Ichigo interrupts and arrives, attacking Aizen. Aizen, however, has a shield behind his neck, which is the spot Ichigo tries to strike. Ichigo is ashamed as he did not strike with his mask on, as he is hesitant to draw on his hollow powers, ever since the Ukiura incident. Aizen then taunts Ichigo, however, Kamamura calms him down, as all the visors and captains arrive onto the scene to protect Ichigo Kurosaki. Everyone begins to fight Aizen, and while at first they seem to be confident, Aizen begins to destroy them with his strength alone. He easily destroys Kamamura's Bankai, as Gin Ichimaru commentates and says Kyoku Sugetsu is not what makes one fear Aizen. The Espada obeyed him because of his strength. Aizen then destroys some of the visors and appears to be winning. However, then Soifone steps in, Toshiro freezes Aizen, and because of that she can stab him twice. However, it does not kill Aizen. Aizen then looks at her and says Soul Reaper battles are a battle of spirit energy, and that he can simply suppress her technique with his own spirit energy. However, in a few brief moments, Shunsui uses the shadow on the ice to strike Aizen from behind, while Toshiro rushes at Aizen and Shinji reverses his senses to reduce Aizen's reaction. Aizen appears to have been killed. And as the lieutenants celebrate, he is secretly pretending to be Momo, and the being that they have all stabbed was Momo. In mere seconds, Aizen then defeats the remaining troops of the Gotai 13, with the exception of Yamamoto. In this moment, Yamamoto appears in battle, and with ease he is about to use his Ryujin Jaka to kill Aizen. However, Aizen planned ahead and genetically modified an Arrancar to seal Yamamoto's Zanpakuto. While the battle takes some time, Yamamoto absolutely destroys Wonderweiss with just his fists, since Wonderweiss was able to seal Yamamoto's Zanpakuto. As Wonderweiss was destroyed, he began to explode. All the flames that Yamamoto had released were sealed away into Wonderweiss, and when Wonderweiss died, they just exploded. Quickly, Yamamoto had to jump on his body, taking a crap load of damage. This causes him to be unable to move. However, as Aizen approaches his body to finish him off, Yamamoto grabs Aizen's leg and casts Hado number 96, which still manages to wound Aizen. This is when Ichigo attacks Aizen, escaping from the smoke. As he and Ichigo fight, Aizen reveals two things. One, that he is now fused with the Hokyokyu, and the second being that every battle Ichigo had fought up to this point took place in the palm of his hand. Aizen then gives his famous speech on truth after giving him hardcore evidence. Ichigo then asks why he would be the best test subject and brings up why would he choose him when he became a Shinigami. Aizen responds slowly and explains that he knew about him since he was born and that he was chosen because he is half human and as he says this, Ishin as a Shinigami appears, cutting Aizen off. Ishin immediately kicks Ichigo down and they talk. Immediately, Ichigo attacks Gin Ichimaru while Ishin sends Aizen flying by flicking his finger. Meanwhile, Gin Ichimaru goes Bankai. Gin and Ichigo talk for quite a bit. Ichigo can't understand Gin Ichimaru and the reason for him fighting with Aizen. They continue to fight back and forth as Ichigo slowly learns the power behind Gin's Bankai. Gin, however, is still too strong for Ichigo and is overpowering him. Meanwhile, Ishin has pushed Aizen to his limits as a Shinigami, and that the Hokyoku is starting to understand him. We also learn that the Hokyoku's true power is to read the hearts of those around it and realize their deepest desires. As Aizen continues to explain, he is cut off by Gin and Ichigo's battle. Then Aizen begins to evolve and Kisuke Urahara arrives on the scene. Kisuke unleashes a ton of Kido spells, however nothing really works against Aizen much until one single spell, and this spell is causing Aizen's Ryatsu to burn him from within. However, even this fails to defeat Aizen. Kisuke and Ishin then attack him together while Yoichi arrives from above to strike. Everything continues to fail as Aizen says to keep coming up with more plans and you'll keep crushing them, till Kisuke becomes exhausted. Ichigo then has a conversation with Gin. This is when Gin plays with Ichigo's mind a little bit and says that he sounds like he has already given up. We then see him fighting Ichigo. Almost instantly, Gin breaks Ichigo's holomasks and just tells him to just give up. Meanwhile, Kisuke and the group are losing badly against Aizen, and we even see Aizen admit that Kisuke is the only being smarter than he is. At this point, Aizen ends up defeating them, but not before evolving once again. Gin then taunts Ichigo more, and for the first time, Ichigo is genuinely and truly scared of his opponent. He is on the ground, and when Ishin gets up telling him to go with him, Ichigo tells him it's impossible to beat Aizen. Ishin then remotivates Ichigo and reminds him of his reason, and they then chase after Aizen. Ichigo then tells him that it's impossible to beat a being with that kind of monstrous Ryatsu. Ishin then realizes that Ichigo has potential to beat Aizen because he can sense Aizen's Ryatsu. Then he continues to remotivate Ichigo and remind him of his reason, and they then chase after Aizen. Meanwhile, Aizen breaks the Kotatsu. This allows Ichigo and Ishin to stay inside the Dangai, where 1 day is like 2,000 days. Ishin then decides to teach Ichigo the final Getsugo Tensho. Ishin uses his spirit energy to contain the Koryu, and Ichigo enters his inner world to learn this ultimate technique. When he enters this world, he is immediately attacked by Tensa Zangetsu, and was told that he will not learn Final Getsugo Tensho, as what Ichigo wants to protect is not what Tensa Zangetsu wants to protect. Meanwhile, Aizen has found Ichigo's friends. Tensa Zangetsu shows Ichigo's inner world and shows how all the hope has left it, and how the rain has stopped but it is now drowned in water. Zangetsu then combines with Ichigo's inner hollow, and they become one being, which Ichigo must fight. Meanwhile, Aizen is about to kill Tatsuki when Don Kannoji arrives prepared to fight Aizen. However, moments after that, none other than Rangiku arrives. Don Kannoji then runs with Ichigo's friends while Rangiku has a standoff with Aizen and Gin. Gin, however, quickly grabs her and takes her to someplace safe when he asks her why she came here. She replies that it's because he is here, and so that she can finally ask him why he joined Aizen. Gin calls her a nuisance and jumps off the building, returning to Aizen. Aizen is about to reach Ichigo's friends. Zenosuke arrives just in time though, using the most powerful Shikai against Aizen. However, after realizing Aizen's true opponent should be Ichigo, he decides to allow Aizen to live, and runs with Ichigo's friends away. As they are running away, Gin returns to Aizen's side. Aizen starts to chase after them a little bit, however Gin puts his hands on Aizen's Zanpakuto and says he will take care of them. However, seconds later his Zanpakuto extends, striking Aizen and leaving a fragment of his blade inside of Aizen's heart. This fragment is his Bankai's true power. It is a poison that dissolves cells at an alarming rate. Immediately a hole is created through Aizen's chest, and Gin says you are going to die with a hole in your chest like you always wanted. We then see Gin jump through the hole, grabbing the Hokyoku, thinking the battle is now over. However, although Gin had the Hokyoku, Aizen was still able to draw power from it and evolves. Immediately, Aizen cuts Gin down, killing him. Aizen then thanks Gin as evolution requires fear, and by Gin killing Aizen in quotations, he was able to evolve into a being that transcends Hollows and Shinigami. We then receive Gin Ichimaru's flashback. Gin learned that Aizen was the boss of some individuals that took something from Rangiku and badly hurt her, so he plotted to kill him out of revenge. One random night, Rangiku saw him with blood on his face, where he decided to become a Shinigami and change things, so that Rangiku won't have to cry. As Rangiku finds the dying Gin, Ichigo arrives to fight Aizen. While Aizen is disappointed with Ichigo, Gin takes one look at Ichigo's eyes and realizes he can now die peacefully and leave this in his hands. Ichigo then grabs Aizen's face and takes him to the mountain so that his friends won't be hurt. Aizen then tries to find justification for Ichigo's strength, and as he strikes him, Ichigo stops his Zanpakuto with just his hand. This freaks Aizen out as he resorts to Kido to stop Ichigo. However, Ichigo cuts right through Hado number 90 like it was absolutely nothing. Ichigo then taunts Aizen, and Aizen evolves into what we call Monster Aizen. This form is able to slightly damage Ichigo, however Ichigo decides it's time to end this, and activates his final Getsugo Tensho, or Mugetsu. Before releasing it, we then see Ichigo training in the Dangai. Ichigo feels the emotions of loneliness from Tensa Zangetsu's sword and lets him pierce through him. He's then taught the technique under the knowledge that this will cost him his powers. That the one that Tensa Zangetsu wanted to protect was Ichigo. And as we return to the present with Ichigo losing his powers, we see him collapse to the ground as Aizen regenerates. This failed to kill Aizen. However, as Aizen was evolving above Monster Aizen, a seal activated. A seal placed by none other than Kisuke or Ohara. As Aizen is sealed away, he yells at Kisuke, talking about how he is a subject to the Soul King and lets himself be controlled by that thing. This is when Aizen becomes sealed. Byakuya and Kenpachi return and Kisuke has a conversation with Ichigo. Right after Ichigo has a conversation with his friends, he ends up collapsing. Within the following month, Aizen is sentenced to 20,000 years of the Mukin, and Yamamoto yells at Kenpachi, Byakuya, and Shinsui for losing their captain robes. We also see moments of characters training, Rangiku thinking about Gin's death, and finally we once again see Ichigo again, and it's been about an entire month of him just sleeping. And as he awakens, the last of his Reiatsu is about to disappear, and he says goodbye to Rukia, and thank you to her as well. That marks the end of the longest arc in Bleach, and by far, at least in the anime, in my opinion, the most thematically rich one. From the concept of the heart, to loneliness becoming reoccurring again, to the story covering vengeance so deeply, the story of Bleach is incredible. This arc is amazing, and other than it running too long in some small sections, it is truly a masterpiece throughout its entirety. But without all further ado, let's get into the fourth arc of the story.